Hey class, Mr. Bassler here. Today we're going to be taking notes on page 163 in our binders, and we're going to be talking about graphing lines or graphing linear functions in standard form. So we're going to start here at the top. The graph of a linear function is a line. Right, so far in this chapter, we have graphed linear functions in two forms below, right? We've graphed it in slope-intercept form. We've graphed it in point-slope form. And today we're going to learn the third way to graph lines, and that's going to be in standard form. All right, so if we recall, in slope-intercept form, right, that's my y equals my mx plus b. Right, in this form, right, we get our m, which is our slope, right, which is also kind of like our rise over our run value. And we also have our b value, which is our y-intercept. All right, and we'll use both of those to graph. And then more recently, we learned about point-slope form, right? In point-slope form, right, it looks like y minus, right, my y1 value equals my m times x minus my x1 value. All right, in this form, right, again, we have a slope, right? We have our m value, which again is our rise over our run. But here, instead of a y-intercept, we have a point, right? We have an x1, comma, y1, right? And that's a point on the line. So today, we're going to learn about standard form, right? This is going to be our third way to graph a linear function, right? And with standard form, it's going to look like this. It's going to be ax plus by is equal to c. Right, and with this form, what this is going to tell us is going to be our x-intercept, right, and our x-intercept is going to be, right, some number, comma 0, and we're also going to have a y-intercept, right, that b value we're going to use, or that b is, excuse me, we're going to use for our y-intercept, and that a we're going to use for our x-intercept. Right, and with our y-intercept is going to be 0, comma some number. All right, there are a couple of rules that go with standard form. All right, so here are the two rules that we kind of have to remember, or kind of that happens with standard form. Right? Rule number one is that our a value must be positive. Right, our a value has to be a positive number. Right, that's our rule number one. And the second rule with standard form is that there can be no fractions in standard form, right? If there are fractions in standard form, then we're going to have to clear them out and make them not fractions anymore. All right, so now let's take a look here. All right, now how do we graph in standard form? Well, graphing in standard form is fairly easy, right? We have to find the x-intercept and we have to find the y-intercept. Well, what does this mean, right? Well, to calculate the x-intercept, right, this is going to mean that we're going to need to plug in 0 for y, right? Because when y is 0, then I'll have an x-intercept. So we're going to say plug in 0 for y, and then we're going to solve our equation. All right, so let's go ahead and try that. So here, right, we have x minus 2a is equal to 4. Well, that's in standard form, right? That's ax plus by is equal to c. Right, so I'm going to plug in 0 for y and then solve for x. So I have x minus 2 times 0 now, right? 2y is going to be 2 times 0 is equal to 4. All right, and now when I simplify this, right, I get x is equal to 4, right? Because 2 times 0 is 0, and I get x is equal to 4. Well, here I don't need to solve, right, because I get x by itself. So that means my x-intercept is 4, comma 0. And now, right? Step 2 is to calculate the y-intercept. Well, for the x-intercept, I plug 0 in for y and solved, right? So for my y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for x this time and then solve for y. So let's see, plug in 0 for x and solve. All right, so when we do this, we're going to have, instead of x minus 2y, right, we're going to plug in that 0 for x. And then we're going to be left with minus 2y is equal to 4. Right, this time we have an equation to solve, to finish up here, right? We have negative 2y is equal to 4. And to solve for y, right, we're going to have to divide by negative 2. We're going to divide this side by negative 2. And when we solve for y, we get y is equal to negative 2, right? 4 divided by negative 2 is negative 2. So now that I have y is equal to negative 2, that means my y-intercept is 0, negative 2. All right, so now to graph here, right, the last thing I got to do is go ahead and plot the intercepts and then connect the points. Right, so again, my x-intercept is 4, 0. So on my graph here, 4, 0 is going to be 4 on my x, right? And it's going to be right on my x-intercept, right, or x-axis because it's an x-intercept. And then my y-intercept is 0, negative 2. Again, a y-intercept is an intercept, a point that crosses the y-axis, right? So 0, negative 2 is going to be right there. So you have your 2 points, right? And now we can go ahead and connect points there, and that is our line, right? That's how we're going to graph equations that are written in standard form. And if you notice in standard form, we're missing something, right? And that is a slope, right? We're not given a slope, and we don't need to find a slope, right? Because we have an x-intercept, we have a y-intercept, we have our 2 points. All right, so now let's go ahead and practice here. We're finding our x and y intercepts, right? Because this is going to be what we're going to need to do in order to graph is to find those x and y intercepts. Right, so here's our equation, 3x plus 2y is equal to 6. So, right, I got to find my x-intercept. I got to find my y-intercept. Well, again, to find my x-intercept, I'm going to plug in a 0 in for y, right? So we get 3x plus 2 times 0 is equal to 6. Right, again, this is my x-intercept that I'm going to solve for first. All right, so when I simplify and solve, right, we get 3x is equal to 6, right? And we know that we got to divide by 3, and we get x is equal to 2. All right, so this means my x-intercept is 2, 0. All right, and now I got to do the same thing, but except I'm going to plug in a 0 in for x now to find my y-intercept. All right, so now I'm going to get 3 times 0 plus 2y is equal to 6. Right, and when I go ahead and simplify this, I get 2y is equal to 6. Right, we know that we have to divide both sides by 2. And we get y is equal to 3. So that means my y-intercept is 3, so it's going to be 0, 3. All right, so we solve for the x and we solve for the y. So every time we're going to have to solve 2 different equations, one to find my x and one to find my y. All right, so in example B here, my equation is 4x minus 2y is equal to 12. So let's go ahead and plug in 0 for y to find our x-intercept. All right, so this is what we're going to get. 4x minus 2 times 0 is equal to 12. All right, well, I know 2 times 0 is 0, so then we get 4x is equal to 12. We're going to divide by 4. And we're going to get x is equal to 3. That means my x-intercept is 3, 0. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video and try finding the y-intercept. All right, let's see how we did here. So for our y-intercept, right, that means we have to plug in 0 in for x. So this is going to be 4 times 0 minus 2y is equal to 12. Well, 4 times 0 is 0. So really, I have negative 2y is equal to 12, right? So just be careful with those negative or minus signs, right? Make sure you bring those down, right? Make sure you carry those with that y term if there is a minus sign there. So now we just got to divide by negative 2 to both sides. And we get y is equal to negative 6. So therefore, my y-intercept now is 0, comma, negative 6. All right, now let's turn the page and kind of put this whole thing together, right? We're going to find our x-intercept, we're going to find our y-intercept, we're going to plot both and graph it, right? Because that is our main goal here today, is to graph in slope-intercept form. All right, so here's our equation. 3x minus 6y is equal to 18, right? So this is definitely written in standard form, right? ax plus by is equal to c, right? My a value is positive. There's no fractions. So now I'm ready to find my x and y intercepts and then plot those points and then connect the dots. So again, to find my x-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for y. So we're going to get 3x minus 6 times 0 is equal to 18. Well, 6 times 0 is just 0, so I'm going to get 3x is equal to 18. I'm going to divide by 3 to both sides, and I get x is equal to 6. So my x-intercept is 6, comma 0. All right, so at first I found my x-intercept here, which is at 6, comma 0. So you can go ahead and kind of plot the 6, comma 0s for your x-intercept. It should be right there. And now I got to go ahead and find the y-intercept. All right, again, to find the y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 in for x, and then just solve for y. So we're going to get 3 times 0 minus 6y is equal to 18. Well, 3 times 0 is 0. So I'm just left with negative 6y is equal to 18. And I know I got to divide by negative 6 to both sides. And you get y is equal to negative 3, right? And this just means that my y-intercept is at negative 3. So my point is 0, comma, negative 3. So on my graph here, I'm going to plot 0, comma, negative 3, which is right down there on my y-axis. I have my 2 points, and I can go ahead and connect the dots here. All right, we're not going to worry about rewriting in slope-intercept form today, right? We'll save that for another day here. But let's go ahead and look at a couple more example problems here. So example 3, right, we're going to graph our equation A here of 6x plus 2y is equal to negative 12. Right? Again, it's in standard form, right? My A value is positive. There's no fractions. So now I'm going to go ahead and find my x and y intercepts. All right, so again, to find my x-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for y. So I'm going to get 6x plus 2 times 0 is equal to negative 12. All right, well, when I do simplify here, right, we get really 6x is equal to negative 12. Right, we divide by 6. And we get an x-intercept, or x equals negative 2. That means my x-intercept is negative 2, comma 0. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and plot that on my x-axis. Right, I'm going to put my point at negative 2, comma 0. And there's my x-intercept. Right now, again, I got to do the same thing, but finding my y-intercept here. Right, so now for my y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for x. Right, so this is going to be 6 times 0 equals 2y, or sorry, 6 times 0 plus 2y equals negative 12. So really this becomes 2y is equal to negative 12, right? We're going to divide by 2, and we get y is equal to negative 6. So then that means my y-intercept is 0, comma, negative 6. So I'm going to have plot that point down here at 0, comma, negative 6. I have my 2 points. I can go ahead and connect the dots. I connect the points, and there's my graph for this equation. All right, let's go ahead and finish off this page here. Right, we're going to look at letter B. Our equation is 4x minus 8y is equal to negative 12. Right, so we're good here, right? ax plus by is equal to c, right? That's my standard form, right? A is positive. There's no fractions. So now I go ahead and find my x and y intercept, right? So again, for my x-intercept, I'm just going to plug in 0 for y and solve for x, right? So really, when I plug in 0 for y, right, hopefully we saw a pattern here, right? So really, my equation then is just going to be 4x is equal to negative 12. All right, well, I can solve that by dividing both sides by 4. And we get x is equal to negative 3. All right, which means it's negative 3 comma 0 for my x-intercept. All right, and now for my y-intercept, right? It's going to be the same thing, right? I'm going to plug in 0 for y, right? And then 0 times that 4 is 0. So I really, my equation now really is just going to be negative 8y is equal to negative 12. I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by negative 8. And now when we divide both sides by negative 8, right, we're going to get a positive 1.5. All right, so sometimes our y-intercept is going to be a fraction or a decimal, and that's going to be okay, right? Especially if it's 1.5, we can kind of go ahead and kind of make it our best guess, kind of in between 1 and 2. Right, we're not always going to get even numbers out. Most of the time we will, but it's going to be okay to get a positive number, or sorry, a fraction or a decimal when we go ahead and have standard form here. So for my y-intercept, right, it's going to be 0 comma 1.5, and I can graph that with fairly decent accuracy here, right, because it's going to be somewhere in between 1 and 2, about halfway in between, right? So you can go ahead and put a dot right in between 1 and 2, and that's going to be my y-intercept there. So I have my 2 points, and again, we can connect those points with our line here. All right, let's look at our last one here, right? So our last equation is 1/3 x minus 6y is equal to 3. Well, I definitely have a fraction there, which I cannot have in standard form, right? So we have to clear out the fraction, right? In order to clear out the fraction, I'm going to have to multiply both sides of my equal sign by some number, right? And in this case, right, that some number is going to be 3, right? I've got 3 in the denominator, so that's going to make the most sense to clear out that 3 from the bottom is to multiply this side of the equation by 3. And we know that what we do to one side of the equal sign, we must do to the other. So I'm going to multiply that other side by 3. And when I do this, my new equation, right, 3 times 1/3, well, that's just going to be 3 over 3, which is just 1, or 1x. All right, and then 3 times that minus 6y, it's going to be negative 18y now, equals, and 3 times 3 is 9. All right, so on letter C here, right, I had to rewrite this equation so that I had to write it in standard form, right, which means no fractions and no negative values for A. All right, so now that it's in standard form, I can go ahead and find those x and y intercepts. All right, so for my x-intercept, again, I'm going to plug in 0 for y, which is going to eliminate that negative 18y, right, because negative 18 times 0 is 0. So really, I get x is equal to 9. Well, that was easy enough, right? So then on my graph here, I'm going to find x is equal to 9. Oh, that's not on the graph here. All right, so sometimes that's going to happen. All right, so again, we're going to use our best estimate here and kind of put a point where 9 comma 0 would be on our graph. All right, and now for my y-intercept, it's going to be the same thing. All right, I'm going to plug in 0 for x. Okay, well, if 0 is in for x, so x is kind of gone away. And then we're going to get negative 18y is equal to 9. So we're going to go ahead and divide by negative 18, divide by negative 18, right? And this time, we're going to get y is equal to negative 1.5. All right, excuse me, not negative 1.5, negative 0.5. And again, that's going to be okay, right? Sometimes we're going to have these 0.5s in our answers here. So that means my y-intercept is 0 comma 0.5, right, or 0.5. So again, on my y-axis here, I'm going to find that negative half, negative 0.05, which again is going to be kind of in between 0 and negative 1. All right, again, just as long as we're in the ballpark, we're going to be okay with your graphs here, right? So now I'm going to connect my 2 points. to make my line here. And that's standard form, right? Just two things to remember, right? To find your x-intercept, right, we're going to plug in 0 for y, plug in 0 for y, and solve. Right, and to find your y-intercept, right, we're going to plug 0 for x and solve. Right, so we're going to have to solve two different equations, one for our x-intercept and one for our y-intercept.